Okay, hi everyone who's joined us. Thank you so much for joining us today for Doors Open Baltimore's presentation with Ron Cassie and his new book. If you love Baltimore, it will love you back. 171 short but true stories. I'm Christina Gaddy. I'm author of Flowers in the Gutter, the true story of the Edelweiss pirates, teenagers who resisted the Nazis. And as a fellow nonfiction writer, journalist, and member of the Baltimore City Historical Society Board, I'm so excited to be talking today with Ron about his new book. I just want to do a couple of thank yous before we get started. Today's presentation is part of Open Doors Baltimore and is presented by the Baltimore Architecture Foundation, Red Emma's, and the Baltimore City Historical Society. For those of you who don't know, Doors Open Baltimore is a free citywide festival of architecture and neighborhoods that invites us all to explore the city and make meaningful connections to the built environment. If you enjoyed today's event, tomorrow there's a virtual tour of Clifton Mansion, and you can see all of the remaining virtual events at www.doorsopenbaltimore.org. And it's a great opportunity to see things that the insides of buildings and tours that you might not see normally. And so thank you to all of the Doors Open Baltimore contributors, sponsors, grantors, and in-kind supporters for making all of these wonderful tours, lectures, and events possible. And it's also co-hosted by Red Emma's, so thank you so much to them. Red Emma's is Baltimore's only cooperatively owned bookstore and cafe that has been bringing you the best of the left since 2004. Located at 1225 Cathedral Street in Mount Vernon, Red Emma's is now open Thursday through Sunday for outdoor book sales and patio seating, and you can order books online from them at www.redemmas.org. And just a reminder that if you don't have a copy of Ron's book yet, you can get it from Red Emma's. And so now for today's presentation. This book talk is going to be a conversation about the book and Ron's experiences gathering these stories. And after he's read and talked a bit about the book, we're going to have time for lots of questions from all of you. So if you have any questions for Ron, you can add them in the chat. You can either do it to everyone, or you can do it to me directly. It doesn't matter. And we'll definitely answer as many of those as possible. And for those of you who don't know Ron, he is a senior editor at Baltimore Magazine, where he's won national awards for his coverage of the death of Freddie Gray, sea level rise on the Eastern Shore, and the opioid epidemic in Hagerstown. He reported from Haiti in the days following the tragic earthquake, New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and from Uganda as part of a humanitarian relief effort. His work has appeared as a notable selection in the Best of American Sports Writing, in partnership with the Pulitzer Center, in Newsweek, City Lab, Huffington Post, Grist, and the New York Daily News, the Baltimore Sun, and alternative weeklies, including the Baltimore City Paper and Urbanite, where he served as editor-in-chief before coming to Baltimore. And prior to becoming a full-time journalist, he spent almost 2 decades swinging a hammer, riding a bike, and pouring drinks for a living. This first book of his, If You Love Baltimore, It Will Love You Back, is a collection of 171 short stories, as the subtitle says, that explore events and share, stories and tales of people that are not always covered by traditional journalism and traditional reporters. New York Times bestselling author Dee Watkins and Baltimore native Dee Watkins has said, Cassie's writing is extremely urgent, necessary, and we need more writers like him, while Guggenheim Fellow and UMBC professor Deborah Rudisil says Ron's book is an essential addition to your Baltimore bookshelf. And I couldn't agree more. So Ron, this is so exciting for you. This is your first book. And it builds on stories that originally appeared in the pages of Baltimore. So I was wondering if you could start out by telling us a little bit more about how the book came to be.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for the introduction, Christina. That's fantastic. I know at the magazine we reviewed your book, and our arts and culture editor at the time, Lauren LaRocca, loved it. In fact, I talked to her this morning about it.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it was. Um, so first, before I started the book, I just wanted to say that this is really nice for me. I moved back to Baltimore. I became a journalist 15 years ago. I moved back to Baltimore, which I call my spiritual home. 15 years ago, to a little like second story apartment in 2639 North Charles Street, so kind of like Lower Charles Village. And the book thing then was next door down in the basement. It wasn't at the current location. Alex with the band Beach House was sharing an apartment below me. So sometimes I heard some great music. And yeah, so it was a fun place to live when I moved back. And the reason I bring it up a little bit is I think the first actual event I went to when I moved back to Baltimore was a book reading by a guy I knew from DC, where I'd been a bike messenger, named Dave Zirin, who's a sports writer, which is how I know him. He wrote a book called What's My Name, Fool, about Muhammad Ali. And he was doing a reading at Red Emma's at the location at St. Paul Street when they were in the basement there, just starting. So I think Red Emma's is about 15 years old. So their opening and my arrival coincided in Baltimore. I think, I don't think there's a lot of people at Dave's reading. I was probably like one of 10, but it was really great. And I felt at home, back home right away in Baltimore. So it's really nice to be here for that. The, the other thing, uh, say about the project. So I did start freelancing for Baltimore Magazine a decade ago, and the very first couple stories I wasn't on staff. They're stories I freelance, or they're stories culled from bigger, longer pieces that I freelance for the magazine. But I've been at the magazine now 8 years, so when I replaced Evan Serpic, who went over to the city paper now as director of communications at OSI Baltimore, there was a section of the magazine, one page called The Chatter. And it was kind of geared to being like a talk of the town, like a New Yorker magazine. And like three like little short vignettes, stories around the city. And I had freelanced a couple of those assignments, but when I got there, I didn't ever assign them, even though I was the editor in charge of that page, to anybody else. I'm like, I wanted to do this myself, like I wanted to go out with a notebook in my back pocket and my bike and ride around. And I think initially, and a little bit maybe geared toward Baltimore Magazine at the time. A lot of times they were maybe a celebrity was coming in town to open a restaurant or to perform or something like that. And me being a former carpenter, bike messenger, bartender, my interests are geared very much at the street level, the ground up, and I like finding those stories that are like beneath the radar a little bit. So I started going to things that I was interested in, but sometimes they were quirky. But there were also things I thought, if there's a couple people there, it must really matter to them. And if it matters to them, there's probably like a story there. And one of those stories that's in the book, and I share in the acknowledgments or the intro section, is Sparrows Point was being stripped down and basically sold for parts. It was once the world's biggest steel mill. The steel for the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, had closed and was just being sold off for parts, literally. And I had grown up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, near the original Bethlehem Steel, like on the border. And it's one reason why I felt at home in Baltimore when I moved here in the mid 80s. Initially to go to college, although that took quite a long time actually to work my way through. But I felt at home. So I thought I would go. They were offering bus tours. I saw an ad you could tour the old plant. But it was for like companies and executives, like if they wanted some hot steel roller or some, enormous trucks or factory equipment, like you could come check it out. And I thought, well, I'm going to go along and just see what's there. And I thought maybe there might be an old steel worker who was showing up for one last kind of roll around the old place. And so I got there and got on the bus, and it was like leather seats and coffee, complimentary coffee and all that. And there was executives from some big, still surviving U.S. steel companies, and also executives from like Japan and Chinese steel companies on the bus. And there was a retired steel worker, and so he told me about the story about working there, and they had like 27 softball teams. That's how many people were employed there. and we're living in a company town. And one of the guys was making a few last bucks as a security guard, at the plant. And his father and grandfather had worked there, and his wife was her father and grandfather worked there, were kind of sending him out the door every day. So those were the kind of places. I try to tell the stories like in real time, like present tense, so you're there.
Yeah, do you want to read that one for us? That story about being on the bus and going to Sparrows Point?
Sure.
I like that one.
Okay. Let's see, I'm not sure where it is. What I got?
You got it.
So you have the intro is probably longer than the story. So this is Sparrows Point Road, January 21st, 2013. It was a freezing cold Monday morning, and the title of the story is Everything Must Go. On a cold, muddy morning outside the former United Steelworkers Local 9477, men sipped complimentary coffee in paper cups before stepping onto chartered buses for a tour of the property that once housed the world's largest steel mill. Hilco Trading, which bought Sparrows Point in a bankruptcy sale, is offering previews of the mill's vast stock of heavy equipment, machinery, trucks, and tools for an online auction of an industry, as one visitor, a former Bethlehem steelworker here, puts it. At the first stop, everyone exits the bus, and two Colorado reps from Evraz, North America, which operates several smaller mills, inspect 200-ton transport trucks known as slab haulers. A rep from O&K American Corp, headquartered in Japan, is also aboard, along with several retired or laid-off Sparrows Point workers, coming for a last glimpse of the corrugated warehouses, tin mills, machine shops, rail cars, and loading docks. I came here in 1962, right out of Kenwood High School, into an apprentice program, says Lawrence Natchell, glancing out a bus window. We had 27 softball teams. Shipping side used to play the steel side after work. Inside a draft and repair shop, a former steel worker in the hot tin mill for 39 years mans a security post, earning a few last non-union wages before the place becomes completely barren. A Midwestern manufacturing rep asks him what caused the plant's closure. The ex-steel worker gives the question some thought and shakes his head inside a yellow hard hat. Everyone has a different reason, he says finally. I'll tell you though, the other day I got home and my wife was crying. My grandfather worked there all those years, she says. My dad worked there all those years too, she says. And you worked all those years, and now you're there shutting it all down. And there's a postscript to the story. In 2018, Amazon opened an 855,000 square foot fulfillment center at Sparrows Point.
Thanks. I think that piece especially, but a number of them, kind of resonated because they, or like had this like similar theme. Cities change all the time, but I was like thinking about loss a little bit too, just like, we used to have a city paper that would cover like these, happenings around town and stuff like that might not really get covered right now. And was there anything in compiling these stories that like made you feel sad or nostalgic, or maybe in a nice way offered an opportunity to like reflect back on all of these years of reporting?
I'll just go back to, I think the question you were asking before that, I took a long while and then didn't answer. How the book came into being, I didn't want these stories lost. You know what I mean? It was like a diary of 10 years for me. I don't want these stories lost to history, I guess. And, I've worked at a number of places, just even in my 15 years as a journalist, that don't exist anymore. I mean, the city paper is one of them. Those were my first long form journalism, like forays, and the Howard County Times is gone. And, the Baltimore Examiner is gone, and Urbanite is gone. And, so there's like 5 or 6 places where I've worked that are no longer around. So Baltimore Magazine should be worried, I guess. Maybe I'm bad luck, but I didn't want these, websites disappear, so I didn't want these stories to be lost. And so, yeah, I mean, reflecting back, my feeling is, and we're both members of the Baltimore City Historical Society, is that, the history isn't history. It's not even past, and I think when you understand there's an Amazon fulfillment center on that grounds now, paying non-union wages, non-union health care, people there, working crazy hours, fired for no cause. Amazon has fired as many, that plant has fired as many as 300 workers in a month, and some of the crippling effects of that. So I think that's part of what attracts me to these stories is, change, turnover. I mean, for me, it's much less about nostalgia than about what gives our lives meaning, and I think when Lawrence's story about the 27 softball teams, or his wife about other steelworkers' wife about my grandfather worked there, my father worked there, the meaning that comes from community and doing work that's meaningful to you, there's guys who work there very proud that they helped build the Empire State Building, Golden Gate Bridge, and all that. And I think those jobs, built Baltimore, the GM plant, those union jobs. And I think when we see vacant houses across the city today, things like that, it's because these jobs were exported overseas. And so if you're, I'm the type of reader, like my mind goes to these places when I read stories, So I hope it does for other people, I guess, is what I'm saying. But yeah, so sometimes it gets sad, it gets angry, but more often, there's other stories that are maybe more positive, more uplifting and funny in the story. Maybe I can read one of those to balance it out a little.
Yeah, that's like there's one, that's one kind of thematic thing that happens in all. But yeah, why don't you read one that's okay. I don't know how
I'll read one from our ex-nun Texas Hold'em poker player. This is a more
that sounds
word. I'll just say, a lot of times I meet people and it seems like I'm meeting them at the right time too. These stories come up at the right time where they resonate with me in particular, and something that I'm going through weirdly that helps me process it, like you get a little bit of wisdom from stories like this, like, the reminders of me to think about, like, sometimes community and what's important, and, that like architectural preservation is not just like some, it's not just like preservation for preservation's sake, that we find meaning in these places, one last thing I've told other people before is I teach writing at Towson University, and a lot of students have a hard time getting their ideas around stories about place, which the book is very much about stories about place and character. So it's hard when you're younger. But I'll ask students in class, like, did anybody move from their childhood home? And about half may raise their hand. And inevitably, when I ask them, like, have you ever revisited your childhood home? And often the memories are sweet, but they're also often bittersweet. And then the emotional aspects that are tied up and the meaning that's tied up in the place, they start to kind of get a grasp of it. And so a lot of these stories, for me are about place too. And I think it will resonate with our readers. So I'll read you. And this is a story that's like, has some, like, it's a rated R story for language. I'll just put that up front in case anybody wants to hit mute for a few minutes. So this is called The Life of Riley. It's a year old, from last October. I went and played some Texas Hold'em with a 77-year-old former nun, one-time romper room school teacher. We went to the casino, M&T. We also went to a illegal poker game with some political folks in Baltimore whose name I couldn't reveal. That was part of elected representatives really don't want you putting their name out there. But anyhow, it's called The Life of Riley. Mary Carol Riley refused to drop her drawers in a room full of men, even at gunpoint. I thought, this is it. I will have to die right here, the 77-year-old former nun in training, one-time romper room teacher, erstwhile actress, ex-cabbie, and still serious poker player recalls with a blue-eyed twinkle. Armed robbers had busted into the illegal backroom poker game in Greektown, where she had a seat at one of the playing tables, the only woman there, and told everyone to stand, face the wall, and pull down their pants. They broke in yelling, "Motherfucker this, motherfucker that," and pistol whipped one guy because he wouldn't or couldn't open the safe. The guy next to me was shaking like a leaf. I put my hand on his shoulder to steady him. Known in local Baltimore poker lore as the Hold'em Holdup, the 2006 stick-up gained real notoriety because of what happened next. A player who had stepped out moments before to call his girlfriend heard the commotion and flagged down a patrol car. Police broke up the heist. The bandits had been tipped off about the high-stakes game and recovered almost $24,000. Such games, often moving from site to site, were common around the city before the Horseshoe Casino opened, Riley notes, and the high-profile attorneys and cops themselves sometimes got busted for taking part. How a former Catholic postulate who became Chicago television's romper room teacher in the late 60s and later acted in national television commercials with Jodie Foster, the Pillsbury Doughboy, and Folger's Mrs. Olson, ended up in a Greektown poker game is a circuitous story. Among other highlights from her Zelk-like journey, Riley was in the courtroom galley during the Manson trial and nearly got tossed out after she began sobbing when the details of Sharon Tate's death were presented. She landed a bit part in the groundbreaking 70s TV series All in the Family, from which she still receives the occasional 17-cent royalty check. She drove a cab in Hollywood, hosted a talk show on WJZ. Phil Donahue was once a guest, volunteered in New Orleans after Katrina, and taught English in China. In between, she taught literature to Archdiocese Baltimore middle schoolers for 25 years. If you want to understand my life, she volunteers before Yes, a lively poker game, including several political types at a secret backroom location in Southeast Baltimore. You've got to understand I was always running away from three things: my mother, the Catholic Church, and Baltimore. But always running back too. Riley grew up in a multi-generational household near Pimlico. She snuck in to pet the horses as a girl, the daughter of a depressive alcoholic father who ran the family's downtown leather shop, and an overworked, neurotic, repressed, loving, and kind mother. After attending Catholic all-girls Seton High, Riley started at what is now Frostburg University before quitting to join the Sisters of St. Cyril and Methodist convent in rural Pennsylvania. As a girl, I had a crush. A girl I had a crush on left school to get married, and that had broken my heart, recalls Riley, who is still coming to terms with her own sexuality. However, after learning of her parents' mental health issues, her father had undergone electroshock therapy, the convent asked her to leave. A few years later, her beloved younger brother's suicide sent her into a half-decade alcoholic tailspin. She's been sober for 44 years. In the early 70s, Riley told her mother she was gay. By then, Riley was sharing an apartment in New York with a prominent women's rights leader. She and her mother were driving to Sunday Mass at St. Patrick's. Initially, her mother appeared more flummoxed than shocked or angry when she came out about being gay. We were in the car, just me and her, and I'll never forget it, Riley said. "What do you do?" her mother asked her. "Mother, I don't ask you what you and Daddy do." We didn't talk the rest of the way. Then as we were walking up the steps to St. Patrick's, she slipped her arm underneath my arm. The sweetest gesture, said more than any words. The poker, she explains, is social and competitive, which she likes, but also soothing, keeping her mind focused on the game and people around her. She's competed twice in the World Series of Poker tournaments in Las Vegas, never winning or losing outrageous money. At Delaware Park, she's known as Sister Mary, which she doesn't mind. On occasion, she'll hear, "Nice hand, Granny," which she does. I told one guy, "Fuck you," and they threw me out.
Going back to one of the things you were saying before, so like Doors Open Baltimore is all about exploring the city, connecting to the built environment, feeling a part of a place. And like you said, these stories really create a sense of place in Baltimore. And can you tell us more about creating that kind of like real-time feel that the stories are written in? Your anything from your choice to doing that to how you actually accomplish it, as a little bit of a writer nerd question.
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate that the Notebook gives you a chance to go meet people you normally wouldn't meet and ask questions, and kind of gives you access and a reason for doing this kind of stuff. I think different than most like newspaper stories, and is that they're writing about the thing that's taking place in the fact. They're not like getting a chance to spend all day with people, or like a couple days with Mary Carol Riley, um, and or spending the day at Sparrows Point on a bus and walking around. It's more about just the journalism, what's happening. The newsiness of it. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's all just about like hanging out with people. I try to do like the phone interview in advance and get down the details and do as much research as I can, so I don't have to ask any of those questions when I'm there. I'll follow up later, so I can just kind of be present in the moment. And the great thing is, like with cell phones, is I have to take less notes. I can just kind of take pictures of stuff, so I can recall it later. Um, and I can just kind of be present and just hang out, and um, I did a story about the squeegee kids, and what their lives are about, and what they're like, and they're in the news a lot, and so the idea was just to go spend a couple days on the street corners with them and ask them about their lives, and they'll let you hang out and talk to you, and especially once you're there long enough that you kind of become invisible and they stop realizing you're there, and you realize you're just hanging out with like 14 or 15 or 6-year-old kids having fun, joking around, busting each other's balls. And then, inevitably, like I said, what I learned in the process, right? Like you forget, I mean, I'm a middle-aged man. I forget what it's like to be 15 years old, and just wrestle with your buddies in the street or something, right? Like you just, and forget how smart they are. Like they realize, those squeegee kids realize, like the people that are coming down 83 or on Route 40, like, it's not really about them. It's what the people in the car are going through. They're like, I'm pretty much the same every day. And they're like, I realize I'm rolling up to somebody's windshield, and that's not necessarily cool, but I'm the same to everybody. But like people's reaction to me varies widely. And they realize like, this has nothing to do with me. So that self-awareness and that intelligence, and, I think, and like we said, talking about it a little earlier, the sense of place, that when they're at the bottom of 83 on President Street, 83 was built right through downtown to facilitate white flight, to facilitate the exodus of capital and people to the suburbs. And people live in those suburbs and come downtown, they want to go right back out, and they don't want to really see the kids from Douglas homes often. Not everyone, of course, but, and so there's an irony there too, that's right, these kids from Douglas homes right next to 83 where they live, that are creating so much angst among suburban drivers. So I try to bring that out in the story as well, but mostly, it's just about being present and observing.
Yeah, and we've talked about this too. That like your notebook, and a reporter's notebook in general, your notebook functions as this excuse to talk to people. Go up to people, see what's happening, and I think sometimes that can turn into a story of just like, well, what's going on over here? Let me figure it out. And can you share like if there was ever an unexpected time where you just had that notebook, you walked up to somebody, you started talking to them, and that turned into a story, or it turned into, the further reporting and then the hanging out with the person, at a later time?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's inevitably one story kind of leads to another, but it seems often like years down the road, like yeah, it often seems to happen so much later. I so one story was, I'll tell you one accident. I was working on a kind of a story about Amazon. I was trying to figure out a way to do a story about Amazon, these fulfillment centers, and and the delivery to Baltimore, and like how things actually get from the Amazon fulfillment centers to our front doors, and it was hard. I couldn't really crack the nut. I couldn't really get access to Amazon and find out the whole web of how it was being delivered. Some stuff's being dropped at Whole Foods. Sometimes it's private contractors delivering stuff. There's stuff being dropped all over at night. There's stuff being stolen. It's like hurting our downtown. But I was just trying to figure out what that web was of the delivery. And I couldn't really get there. But as I was reporting that, I came upon that uh, GM, the last GM plant in Baltimore was closing, and the big Amazon fulfillment center, the second one is at Sparrows Point. The second one is where a massive GM plant used to be in Southeast Baltimore, also on Hollowbird Avenue. So I'm down there on Hollowbird Avenue, and I'm trying to report this Amazon story, and I'm realizing that like the GM plant used to be here, used to employ like 7,000 automobile workers. And they were still making some GM plants up in White Marsh, some parts. And I realized I came across a story that, oh, that plant is closing, like that's being shut down as well. And so that became the last auto worker in Baltimore, the story from last year. And I literally spent like the morning, the guy who was shutting off the lights at White Marsh, it was really after, I think it was 75 or 80 years of building cars in Baltimore. He was like the last one turning out the light. But it was from a total failure of inability to get my head around this Amazon story, but being down at that GM plant site and then catching a news story that like the White Marsh plant is closing, that I changed gears and kind of got over there.
Yeah.
It's a better story anyhow. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and it's funny how that happens, that it's like, oh, I'm going this, and it's like, oh, this is actually more interesting.
Yeah. I definitely strike out sometimes too. I mean, I used to write 3 of these a month, and we kind of changed in the magazine where it's now called "You Are Here," and it's on the back page, and there's a photograph with it, and it's really nice because with the photograph and everything on the back page, it's now like month in month out, like one of our most read pieces in the magazine without fail, because people love stories about Baltimore, right? Like, um, so inevitably I'd have to like put like 4 or 5 of these things in my notebook, and inevitably I'd show up and there'd be like 2 people there. I'm like, this isn't gonna fly, or something would go wrong, or you just didn't have that little magical moment happen, where somebody is sharing some wisdom in their life story or some kind of, you know. So,
yeah. And I know you can't pick a favorite story, and obviously not one of them is going to represent the whole book, but is there another special one that you want to read for us?
Yeah, I'll read a short one about pigeon racing in Baltimore. That's an old. Or should I read the Squeegee Kids?
I loved the Squeegee Kids piece when it was like the full thing in Baltimore Magazine. So I think, yeah, read that. That's a great idea.
I'll read that one. All right. Okay, so this is called Coming Clean. It's from last spring. The light turns red at the intersection of President and Pratt in Harbor East, and a half dozen teenagers in teens, jeans, and unlaced high tops spring from the grassy median, holding up Windex spray bottles in one hand and gas station style squeegees in the other. 2 skinny younger boys jump into the street first. A couple of older kids shout and laugh at each other over idling traffic. It's a clear, bright Sunday afternoon in May. The school year is almost over. They try to make eye contact through rolled up windows. "I got you," says one of the teenagers, leaning over the hood of a Honda, spraying a dab on the windshield. "How are you?" a kid says to another driver. "What's up?" "I got you." The second teenager sprays a shot of soapy water on a windshield, trying to drum up business. The woman behind the wheel simply continues to stare at her phone. To still another driver. You look good, bro. You look sharp. You want to wash? A 40-ish man in a white Range Rover emphatically waves his hands behind rolled up windows. No, no, no. Don't touch my car. Another woman in a Honda smiles as she shakes her head towards James, the self-possessed 16-year-old high school student who serves as this group's informal crew chief. I don't have any money, she says, but then she offers him her French fries, which he accepts. Before the light changes, 4 drivers get quick windshield wipes. They appear happy or at least content to hand over $1 or $2 for a slightly better view of the world. And an equal number of drivers appear annoyed. The rest look relieved. They avoid the kids' face-to-face pitch. It's such a familiar scene by now in Baltimore. The 2-minute productions play out like a choreographed dance. The overall reaction, I'd say 50-50, James says as he steps back to the median as cars begin rolling again. Some people definitely resent you. Hey, I get it. You're walking up on their car. Other people tell you you're glad you're out here making an honest dollar. Most of the time, James continues, it's not even about us. Everybody's bringing their own stuff they got going on, and it gets directed at you. Baltimore's squeegee kids have been a source of hot, racialized debate, law enforcement confusion, and political puzzlement for decades. In 1985, the city council voted 11-7, splitting along white-black lines to ban the practice and called for arrests. Black council members saw a proposal as racist because the young entrepreneurs the legislation targeted were almost exclusively black. Baltimore Congressman Perrin Mitchell, the first African-American to represent Maryland, decried the hysteria around the squeegee kids in his regular column in the Afro. So did former columnist Roger Simon, generating a maelstrom of pre-social media letters to the editor. Then Police Chief Bishop L. Robinson, coincidentally the city's first black police commissioner, said he sought the ban not just because some drivers had complained they felt threatened by the youth, but because he was concerned about the squeegee kids' safety. And some drivers had complained they felt threatened by the youth. Indeed, a 14-year-old was killed the next year by a tractor trailer. Facing a backlash, Mayor William Donald Schaefer sought time to appoint a commission to study the issue. Ultimately, the bill went into effect with a compromise, the removal of the threat of incarceration, a law that stands to this day. None of this flap and fury makes sense to Derek, who is 2 years younger than James and has been working a spray bottle and squeegee alongside him since they were 10 and 12 years old, respectively. He doesn't understand why any of this is an issue. He also says that after all this time, he can't get his head around the gamut of responses he receives and endures on a daily basis from adult drivers. Honestly, it's confusing, the 14-year-old says. Someone will give you a $10 bill and thank you, and the very next person will cuss at you. Both Derek and James, like most of the teenagers hustling at this end of I-83, live in the Douglas Homes housing project near the Johns Hopkins Hospital. The urban highway was built in the 1960s to ferry suburbanites in and out of the city. How do you make sense of that when you didn't do one thing different? What do you want us to do for money, James asks. Cut grass? That's a white people thing. There ain't no grass around here.
Yeah, that's so good. In the chat, Heather says, I have 3 bookmarks in my copy because I wanted to pick around through the book without missing anything. I love being able to pick it up and read a couple of stories, and it's so great to get transported to those spots all over the city. It's also fun to get a window into spaces that I haven't yet experienced. And this kind of brings me to one question. So the book is chronological. It starts in 2008 and goes through 2019. Was there a reason that you chose just like strict chronology rather than being like, all right, here's going to be all of my like, you know, Inner Harbor, Fells Point stories, and here's going to be my West Baltimore, and here's going to be North Baltimore, or thematic, like here's entrepreneurship and here's politicians, which feels like it might be harder to do than strict chronology, but I was wondering if you had any kind of ideas behind why that was
right, because it was harder. I couldn't figure it out after much effort, any other way of doing it, you know, like I tried to organize it by themes, by geography, you know, and ultimately just failed miserably. And something about the random nature of it actually also reflected my experience, because I literally would go from the squeegee kids to playing poker with Mary Carol Riley, you know, like So that's the way it all unfolded. That jumbled mix of like felt real and more authentic in the end. So yeah, that's part of it. And I'll just go back to another question I failed to answer earlier. I'm a bad interviewee, God forbid. You asked about like any kind of like weird things kind of happening, or like one thing leading to the next, right?
Yeah.
So we did this cover story in February, The Great Migration into Baltimore. I got the idea from Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, because she did DC where she was from, and Harlem and Chicago. And of course, I'm like, what about Baltimore? Like that's just my knee-jerk reaction to everything. And so there wasn't really anything written, so I want to pursue this, and I'll just show you this. This photograph is from I. Henry Phillips, who was shot for the Afro, and this is a complicated kind of story to tell. This actually is. There's 5 people in this story. But there's actually 9 in the original photograph. The father was a post office worker, and the mom with 9 kids. So the actual photograph would go over to here. So I knew I had been looking for photographs of Black Baltimore a little bit, like the kind that we see a lot of Aubrey Bodine of white Baltimore, and it was hard. And I met Henry Phillips. His grandson is in the process of digitizing his grandfather's work. The grandson's like in his 30s, a photographer, digitizing this treasure trove of beautiful pictures. That iconic picture of Billie Holiday on Pennsylvania Avenue with the umbrella, people know in Baltimore. Louis Armstrong at the Royal Theater. That's all his grandfathers that Webster Phillips is digitizing. So I knew him, and I was looking for like a photograph or a story for something to be the lead art of this story. And I saw this mural by accident. It's up on St. Paul Street. And then I was going through Webster's photographs, and I saw this photograph. Then this photograph was turned into a mural. I saw this photograph in his grandfather's collection. I'm like, holy shit! That mural is on St. Paul Street of this photograph. And he explained that that one of the women, it's this woman, had seen it and identified that it was like her family in the photograph. Like Webster and Michael, the guy who did the Love Project, had done this mural based on this photograph without knowing who the people were. That part was lost. And I saw the mural. I'm like, this is a great photograph. He knew one woman. I called her, and it turned out her family had come from like the Eastern Shore, part of the literally Great Migration story from Virginia and the Eastern Shore. So it fit perfectly with the story, and so it was all weird. Like I saw the mural. She had seen the mural by accident. I knew Webster. I'm going through his grandfather's like 10,000. We're in his studio in East Baltimore, scrolling through, and none of the photographs are right. None of them are right. He comes to this one. I'm like, oh my God, that's this mural I just saw. And he's like, I know one of the people in that family. And so then it became the Great Migration story. And then kind of this You Are Here version in the back of the magazine that month is the story of her finding this mural. Monica Bland took a wrong turn and stumbled across this photograph of her family. And there was a sign about who to call. So that's one of those little weird Baltimore connections. Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
Baltimore is exactly what I was thinking when you said that.
Yeah, I met Webster like 5 years earlier. He had a show at the UB Blake Center of his grandfather's work. And so I knew to go to him to look for photographs for this Great Migration story. And then I'd seen this mural, didn't know the people in the mural, and then I find the picture of the mural in his grandfather's collection, and he'd been in contact with one woman. I mean, just very recently. It all kind of like came together, and so her family story ends up being in the story. Her stumbling upon this mural accidentally in the rain when she'd made a wrong turn becomes a You Are Here. And, yeah. So it's a lot of stuff like that in the book, for sure.
Yeah. So a little bit kind of related to this is obviously there's a breadth of reading that we do to get ideas and background and everything. And so Clifford asks what you're currently reading.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I just read. I'm looking around for it. I just read a book on the 1890s Orioles because I did a You Are Here. They had won 3 pennants in a row, the 1890s Orioles, and I did and this was 125 years ago. I did a story on them, so I just read that book. I read. Here's one. I read. I Got a Monster. Baynard Woods and Brandon Soderberg's great book. What else am I reading? There's a few other books, but I probably can't tell you because it would give away what I'm working on next. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, we can't give away too much about that. Only enough that it might be intriguing. But so your book also feels, I think there's a little bit of a like collaboration aspect to it that, there's you, and then it's published by Apprentice House Press. And so for those who don't know, that's based out of Loyola University here in Baltimore. And you got a lot of the photos from, photographers of the stories that are in Baltimore. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about like the process of bringing that all together and just making it, a Baltimore love project, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing has been a collaboration. Like, these aren't really my stories, right? Like, they're other, I just like translate them. I feel like, like you're just kind of the channel for telling these. They're not really my stories. So that's first. I mean, a friend suggested we have people actually in these stories read their stories, like Mary Carol Riley, the former nun, like read her story about the gambling. Like she'd tell it better than I do. Or Carol Ott, who had founded Slumlord Watchdog website.
Would they want to, did you ask them about that?
I didn't, but I could get like, there's, the guy who's the last auto worker I spent the day with was great, man. He's like, yeah, I mean, Monica, like, I was thinking about just getting them to read their own stories, not me. Like, I don't, I'm the title, If You Love Baltimore, Love You Back. Like, initially, it was called like Baltimore Observed, like, or something like that, because originally that was one of the headlines in the magazine. I'm like, that's not it. Like, it's not the feeling that I have. Is like, it's not Pollyannish, right? I mean, these stories are not really Pollyannish. It's really that like, that sense. If you reach out to folks in Baltimore, they'll give you something to do. They'll tell you their story. They'll, I mean, inevitably sometimes I end up like, helping people. I have a pickup truck, helping people move stuff or lift stuff. I mean, I just spend time, so you kind of get embedded with the activity a little bit and hopefully get lost in it. The photos on the cover, some are mine, others are just Baltimore friends and photographers, and and this one is the swimming pool in Woodlawn. Marvin Thorpe's family teaches kids how to swim. Like, he's just like, I'm like, I'll give you money. He's like, just bring me a signed copy of the book. Like, I don't want, like, almost everybody was just like, just give me a copy of the book. I'm not gonna. Even professional photographers, a couple were done by Baltimore Magazine photographers that we use, and they were like, I'm not taking any money from you. Just give me a copy of the book or something. And so the whole experience, has been like that. For me, it's all been a collaborative project, and working with an editor, working with Apprentice House, and in fact, I think in a few early social media posts and in the acknowledgments in the book, the editors of Baltimore Magazine are like inevitably the first readers of these stories, and like, so my boss, editor in chief, Max Weiss, she just kind of like lets me go do whatever I want. She kind of just was like, whatever, like, and that's freedom. That like, if a writer thinks there's something there, right, like, just to kind of trust them a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, if it's important to me, if it matters to me, it'll matter to readers, kind of thing. Like, trusting that process, and Lydia Woollever and Jane Marion, especially magazine, Ken Engelhart, our editors who read these stories. Lauren LaRocque is our former arts and culture editor, like copy edited the whole book, I've known her for like forever. We worked at the Frederick News Post together, and she's a real collaborative partner and everything. Yeah, so it's all, it all feels like a collaboration. And I should shout out, acknowledge in the book, Dick Basoka, who's the former president of Baltimore Magazine, who passed away before the book got published. He loved these stories, man. He's like the kind of guy, kind of old soul, who would like read one of these little stories, like a little, like 300 or 400 word stories, because in the magazine they were even sure they appear in the book often. And he just like pull up a chair in my office and be like, what were you doing like at Bethlehem Steel at like 8 o'clock on a Monday morning in January when they're closing the place down? What are you doing playing poker with this like lady who's like 77 years old and a nun who curses like a sailor? Like, I don't know. It seemed like fun, and so another thing too about Dick, and I think like people who would enjoy these kind of stories is one story I share a lot is I met with this was actually an event I went to, because sometimes I go to events to meet people and I think there's a story there. So I went to the Baltimore Museum of Industry to meet some Rosie the Riveters who are going to be there. And it's one of those things you'd read in the Sun, okay, weekend event, and people turn up. But I really want to hear their story. And one woman there, and they're all almost 90 years old at this point, a woman, very erect, strong. She could still pick up the welding gun in her hand, and she had come from a farm in North Carolina when she was a teenager. Met her husband in Essex at home, soldier from the war, and they end up like living in Fuselage Lane. They had a little like temporary housing built around the Glen L. Martin plant. And they all had names like Propeller Court and Fuselage Lane. And they kept having kids and adding another bedroom onto this temporary housing and adding a bigger furnace and stuff like that. And 5 kids. After they all went to school, she went to work on the Westinghouse assembly line for 20 years. And so it's just, she's telling me this story. I'm thinking about this little house and all the birthdays, all the graduations, all the grandchildren, the kids playing ball with their dad. And then she says, and it's like the last line of the story, I still live in that house. And just like hit me like a ton of, I was like, wow, her husband had passed from asbestos because he worked at Bethlehem Steel like a couple decades before, and her children were still alive, and grandchildren, but just the memories in this little house, in this little life, that she was kind of like patriotic in the classic sense of the word, and wouldn't have changed a single thing about her life, and just everything contained in this little clapboard, originally temporary house. And so like Dick would come in, he'd read that story like that and be like, where do you meet these people? But it's from spending time with them that and people see that you're genuinely interested. Like I genuinely am interested in hearing. I should say this as a warning to anybody who might be here. If I know you, you'll likely end up in a story at some point. Like that inevitably happens. Like end up finding out everything about you and it becomes a story. So yeah, Dick was great. He loved the chatter. He loved these little vignettes when they first appeared. It's super encouraging. And I think 10 years ago, I'd only been a journalist for like 6 years or so when I started doing this. And Dick really understood like these stories were about place, and that Baltimore magazine, better than any other publication in the city, should be about place and have that meaning for people. And we do have a lot of subscribers who are Baltimoreans who live elsewhere in the country and world to get the magazine, those kind of connections. And he was really encouraging and a real mentor to me. And he'd rein me in if I went too far off the rails. But mostly, he really saw the value in this stuff. And I think, this woman's story is really important to me, but it's also through her story to see a larger span of the 20th century and a Baltimore. If you're inclined to read stories and your imagination do some of the work and fill in some of the subtext and think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you changed the title because everybody loves it. Grace says, number one, I love it as an adopted, Baltimore is my adopted home. I feel very much the same way. And Grace says, I love the title of the book. And she adds, you've answered part of this, but what does it mean to you and why did you choose it? And Catherine also loves the title of your book. So I don't know if you want to add anything more about the title other than you love Baltimore and it loves you. So
I'll say I got some pushback about the title. I'm glad I didn't listen to the naysayers about the title. I'm kidding a little bit, but the title was hard. Just like organizing the book is hard. Like you land on it and you're like, it feels right. You know what I mean? It just feels that this is my experience. I don't know how else to put it. Like, I came to Baltimore at 21 years old. Like I said, theoretically to go to college, it took me like 21 years to graduate. But with a 2.16 GPA, by the way, from Towson State. But I could walk. I lived in Waverly, near where you live, and could walk to a ball game. Had a crab feast, and there was WHFS, the old radio station, and there was a city paper in Baltimore. And from a kid from Allentown, Pennsylvania, like the row house and the kind of blue collar thing felt familiar, but there was all this other like fun stuff that was like adventurous and this like sense of discovery, and obviously so much more diverse as well than Allentown, where I grew up, Pennsylvania. So it was my feeling from the very start. Like I never really moved back. I mean, I stayed here, and I moved to DC for a while, but knew I was those were my lost years. I moved back.
So this is a good kind of question as a follow-up. Christina would like to know, they just moved to Baltimore 2 weeks ago. What is something you want to convey about Baltimore to a newcomer? What's something that is important for us to share?
Go explore everything, do everything, go everywhere and go explore everywhere and go do everything. Like go do things that are outside your normal comfort zone. People will welcome you if you show up. I mean, join organizations. Like I sometimes joke, I had a friend who was in Stockholm. She had like a fellowship there for a year, and everybody who knew her went to Stockholm to visit, because she had like an extra bedroom in the apartment. And everybody there spoke better English than me. They were all like taller and smarter, and the whole city was clean and perfect. And I would have nothing to add to that city. But Baltimore, people like, you want to be friends of like Carroll Park or friends of Patterson Park. Like people will sign up and give you stuff to do, and the very first weekend you'll be meeting people and getting plugged into stuff. And it's the same like all over the city. I think, thankfully, that there's a silver lining since 2015. I think my lifetime has been a real concerted effort since then to break down barriers and segregated walls in the city. I mean, I think among writers and photographers and people planners and community activists, I think it's a real concerted effort. And so I'd say I really push to do that, like push beyond things that are maybe just in your own neighborhood and go to other neighborhoods. Go to readings that are at I saw Claudia Rankin, the great poet, read at like the Pratt Library on Pennsylvania Avenue, in Sandtown. Like go to libraries that are outside your neighborhood for readings. Just to continue to do that.
Yeah, and there's still stuff to explore. We can still go out and explore a little bit, even pandemic times, and just.
Yeah, there's goats I hear at Lyman Dell right now. Like
I know. Talking about publications, I just read the piece in Baltimore Brew about there's goats in Wyman Park Dell for like the next 5 days. So go check it out because there's goats. When I read that in Baltimore Brew, I thought, oh, that's something that would be like a you are here.
I've done my job. If people are actually thinking that now, I've in that way. Volume 2. Look for the goats in Volume 2 of If You Love Baltimore.
Yeah. Does anybody? If anybody else has any questions, feel free to type them in there. I think if I haven't gotten to yours, go ahead, maybe type it again or say, hey, I asked a question, I didn't get it. So this is, book number 1, and you are in your PhD program now, yes? Has it started? I did get accepted to the PhD program at Georgetown, which I just will point out that with a 2.16 undergraduate GPA after 21 years, like And you teach at Towson, where you got your.
I tell students that I'm the worst student who ever went here to come back and teach. Like by far, it's not even close. But they always kind of like hold that against you. Like they always, just like your children, they'll be like, "Oh, that means I don't have to do good in college because things turned out." I'm like, "No, you have to do your homework." Like I was wrong, flunked out 4 times. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't good. Yeah, no, I didn't. So because of for a couple reasons, because I also have another big project in mind that I'm doing right now. I signed another book contract, and another project, and with COVID, I didn't. So this relates to the book. Like, so I didn't. I delayed my acceptance to the Georgetown PhD program for a year to next year because I want to go and be there in person. Like, as much as I really appreciate like the Zoom and the chance to have a book and talk to people about it and how wonderful this experience is, because just like all the other experiences, like you and Nathan and Kate over at Red Emma's like reached out to me. Do you want to do this? Like, it's barely, for me, it's all I can do is like take a shower and show up by 5 o'clock. Like that's so everybody organizes this for me. So that's part of the experience of the book as well as being a collaborative process. I shouldn't leave anybody else out. But so I put it off because I want to be there in person. You know, when I started going to Georgetown, I was a religion reporter at the Frederick News Post, and there's a national organization that offered scholarships to religion writers, and you could go anywhere you want. And they would pay the tuition for like 4 classes. And so I'm like, well, I could go to Frederick Community College and take like comparative religion, or I could like spend $3,000 a semester this organization's money and go to Georgetown. So I went to Georgetown, and I just loved the liberal studies program so much and got so much out of it and learned so much. In fact, my focus was on religion and literature, but one of the courses I took was on place and identity, you know, how they work together, place and identity. And it was Charles Yonkers. I should give him a shout out. He was a professor, and you know, we read amazing stories, and I really got an understanding about how the intersection of place and identity. And so as a journalist who's often reporting, like to get this other way of thinking about stories into your brain, getting your ideas around this, just, you know, was totally like transformative for me. And he like Dick Basoko was a real mentor to me. You know, he saw when I was, and this is now 7 or 8 years ago, when I was going through the master's program at Georgetown. He saw that like we had to keep a blog, and my blog was essentially like "You Are Here" stories. And he saw that they were like about place in Baltimore. It was really encouraging and helpful. And but I would drive my pickup truck to like Chevy Chase and park, and then I would grab my bicycle out of the back of my pickup truck and ride the rest of the way to Georgetown, and then be in class, and then ride back and get in my truck. And I'd inevitably call like, you know, a friend, like, "Oh man, you wouldn't believe this class." And you know, school is really hard when you're working full time. I don't think anybody I know at work is online here, but you know, like, you have a paper due. I'm at work writing my paper, my thesis, or some, you know, some essay that nobody's going to read except your professor. But I'm writing it with everything, you know, doing it the best I can, even though one person in the world is going to read it. That's how much I love the classes. So I'm really I'm really excited about going back and pursuing that. And I look that one. I don't drive much. I ride my bike to work, and so driving once a week towards DC is actually nice. I usually have an Orioles game on the way back, and I'm really, really looking forward to that experience. Really looking forward to that learning experience. Yeah.
And what are you working on that you can tell us about? Because that's always the question with book talks is this book, but what's next? But you can't tell them.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I like reprimanded people at work about not talking about the next story I'm working on. I'm like, you can't. They want, like, people want to put it. I shouldn't even say this. In our magazine, we usually preview the upcoming month's stories, and I'm like, you can't put this in as a preview. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want. We come out like months after. You know what I mean? Like, you can't tip off what you're working. I will say this. I have, as far as books go, with COVID, started a Baltimore-centric anonymous Twitter account, kind of, that is concluding. that I think I'm going to turn into like an ebook or a book. So part of my isolation was I started an anonymous like social media feed. It has more followers than my actual Twitter handle. So yeah, it surpassed like a month ago my own Twitter. So it's done anonymously. I'm probably going to turn that into like an ebook because that's been a really, really fun, um, COVID isolation project. And I signed another book contract that is related to Baltimore. So this might be like my trilogy. And
I love that idea.
but it's like I'm not even gonna stop at a trilogy. I'm sure there'll be multiple stuff coming about Baltimore. I literally have to move to like San Francisco and go live somewhere else, I think, to write about somewhere else. One of the things I love about Red Emma's, and I should probably say this, like, especially like I remember I've done 2 stories about Red Emma's for the magazine around their anniversaries, 5 and 15 years. I really admire about Kate and John Duda is, they could work like anywhere in the country. They have PhDs from Hopkins in intellectual history and have done this amazing like activism work everywhere. But they really committed to the city and working on the ground and making social change happen here and creating models and building out from here. And I just really admire that commitment to the city and putting like real roots down and the things like Thread Coffee and Baltimore Bicycle Works and all these other projects that have spun out of Red Emma's, and the fact that I'm having a book talk through Red Emma's, like this amazing bookstore cafe. Like, I really admire them. I really admire everybody at Red Emma's, and so I just say as a writer journalist, I have other story ideas in mind, but like I don't. I mean, I like writing for Baltimore. I like living in Baltimore. I like writing about the city that I live in. I like meeting the people that live here. And that's what's more meaningful. I don't really want to cover, as a journalist, I don't really want to cover Congress for the Washington Post or something. Like it would be, well, particularly that job would be like beating your head against the wall. But yeah, in kind of an old school Baltimore way, I don't have bigger aspirations than Baltimore, I don't think.
But I think, yeah, so everybody's chiming in when Helen says, you pinpoint, Ron, one of the special aspects of our adopted home. And Allison says, we're so lucky to have you, Ron, and absolutely grateful for all that Red Emma's has done. And Red Emma says, Baltimore is magical and resilient in so many ways. And I think that's, even what you're talking about what Red Emma's has done for the community, right? Like that's one little, one collective that's really done that, right? Like if you love Baltimore, it'll love you back. You create this thing and you work in the community and you make something that's amazing, and then everybody knows that it's amazing and they'll come and they'll love you and they'll support you. And it is, don't move to San Francisco. Don't do that.
Somebody I know, every time I go to Red Emma's, I usually see like D. Watkins on his laptop, and or running the Devon Allen there. Like, so I always see people there. It's an amazing community hub, and it is a great example of, and that commitment to the city and to the people of the city. Like that's what I love about Baltimore. I think there's it used to be the joke that people would aspire if they started a band to play like $5 punk shows. Like that was like nobody was aspiring to go to New York and be some big rock star. Although we do have some big rock stars now. I like that aspect. I like that I meet people and that they're been here a long time, have roots in the city, and I think like Nathan's work with the Baltimore Architecture Foundation about preserving this history and preserving these buildings, and I think people in Baltimore really appreciate that. I remember talking to public historian Mary Rizzo and Eli Poussin, used to be with Baltimore Heritage, and them kind of pointing out to me, Baltimore is not like Miami or Phoenix. Like it's not like there's like sunshine and beaches like to have to offer. It's like history and neighborhoods. Like that's what we have. And I think they're like the founding fathers of Baltimore. Really did a great job of like designing a city that is like with parks and neighborhoods and the Enoch Pratt Library in Patterson Park and making some great community spaces that the city really, Mount Vernon is a beautiful neighborhood. I think, I think that's really attractive. I don't really want to move to San Francisco. I've been there though, and it's lovely.
That's lovely. That's
Lovely.
that's one thing.
My immigrant grandmother, who came through Ellis Island, went out there with my parents in her 70s, and she was like, her breath was taken away by San Francisco. She was like, oh my, we landed on the wrong coast.
Well, I don't think we have any more questions, and I don't have any more questions because I think Nathan says that he lived in San Francisco and Baltimore is much, much, much better. So I think everybody on this, on here right now probably agrees with that. Yeah. And if they don't, why are you, no, I'm just kidding. But thank you so much, Ron, for sharing your stories with us and continuing to share these stories. I think it's really wonderful that we all get to read them, you know, in Baltimore and online and wherever you can share them with us. So I know we're looking forward to more of these stories, but also more of your really excellent reporting that falls into a different category, but really equally important. And again, thank you to Red Emma's for hosting this and having us and creating this space for authors to talk about their work. Thank you to Nathan and the Baltimore Architectural Foundation for making doors open Baltimore a thing, and Baltimore City Historical Society. We got lots of our fellow board members on there who I know are very excited about this. So thank you again, Ron, and we look forward to more readings from you.
Great, yeah, and if anybody has a great story idea, please feel free to contact me. I see a couple people here, Chris Whitaker, who have ended up in Baltimore Magazine stories. So Catherine Evans as well. So if you have a good story idea, don't hesitate. Always looking.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
You're going to be fair.
I'm going to be fair.
Just be fair.
But last time, I remember you saying to me, bring it on, bring it on.
No, I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for fairness. That's all.
You're going to get fairness. But you're okay with some tough questions.
No, I'm not.
You're not okay with tough
Well, I'm
questions?
going to be fair. You don't ask Biden tough questions.
Me?
Huh?
I don't even
It's terrible.
I
It's
only
terrible.
even you.
You know that. Okay, are you ready?
Everybody ready?
We're up.
Okay. Can I start?
Let's go 1 second. Close the door. Higher up and lift a little dog. Should be fine.
Am I okay?
You're good.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm ready. So we have the pandemic. On your watch, we've had racial strife, we've had looting. Why do you want this job? Why do you want to be president again?
Because we've done a great job and it's not finished yet. And when I finish, this country will be in a position like it hasn't been maybe ever. The economy is already roaring back, and other people aren't going to bring it back. Certainly the person that we're dealing with is not going to bring it back. They're going to raise taxes. They're going to take away your Second Amendment. They're going to do things that nobody would even believe. It's radical. There's never been anything like it. No,
Let me ask you.
we are positioned like never before. We're going to have a fantastic year next year.
Let me ask you what you think your the biggest domestic priority is for you right now.
Well, ultimately, let me, and I'll tell you, it was happening. We created the greatest economy in the history of our country, and the other side was coming in.
You know that's not true.
It is totally true.
No.
Best unemployment numbers, best employment numbers, 160 million people working, highest stock market price. You wouldn't say that to Biden, what you just said to me. If he had it, you would never say that to Biden. We had the best stock market price ever, and we're getting close to that price again. We had the best. Everything was the best. Our companies were doing better than they've ever done before. You cannot even think about talking about that.
Well, I'm not going to fact check you.
Well, you don't have to fact check me. I mean, excuse me, the stock market was at its highest. The unemployment numbers for African Americans, for Asian Americans, for Hispanic Americans, for everybody were the best. Every number, virtually every number was the best. We had the best economy ever. And what was happening is things were coming together.
Well, I asked you what your single biggest
Well, no,
priority was.
I'm going to say that.
Oh.
And the other side was starting to call let's get together. There was going to be unity. And then we got hit with the plague, and we had to do it again. And we closed it up, and I saved millions of lives we saved. And now the economy's growing again at record numbers, 11.4 million people employed in the last short
But
period
what's
of
the
time.
priority? I mean, those are all the good things. What do
The
you
priority
have to
now
solve?
is to get back to normal, get back to where we were, to have the economy rage and be great with jobs and everybody be happy, and that's where we're going, and that's where we're heading.
And who is our biggest foreign adversary?
I would say China, they're an adversary, they're a competitor, they're a foe in many ways, but they're an adversary. I think what happened was disgraceful, should never have happened. They should never have allowed this plague to get out of China and go throughout the world, 188 countries, should never have happened.
So there, so.
Leslie, 1 second, please.
What's wrong?
And the flag is wobbling, I think, because it's under a vent perhaps behind you, Tom.
His hair's coming down a little bit.
You can't have the flag
It doesn't look
flying.
nice blowing.
No, it's distracting.
Oh, really?
I can see it.
Yes, for the arrow. I think we're better, guys.
I'm going with or without you
It's
guys.
not moving.
No,
Let's
it's
go.
not. Okay, at this stage, 4 years ago, you were behind in the polls, you won out, and you pulled it out. But this time, you have kind of a double migraine. You have unemployment claims going up, you have COVID cases going up. I mean, it's like the gods have suddenly decided to conspire against
I
you.
don't think so at all, no. I think
Well,
we've
what
done a great
about
job
this-
with COVID.
Yeah,
And
but
we've
the
hired,
numbers are going up.
excuse
so-
me, 11.4 million people. Why? Because the last report was just a little bit off. And this is
No.
without,
Sir, excuse me, cases are up in about 40 states.
okay, you know why cases are up also? Because we do more testing. If we didn't do testing, cases would be way
Yeah,
down.
but why are you saying they're not up? You know, you're saying things that people
I
can see.
don't know, what I'm saying to you, Leslie, is the following. We do more testing than any country in the world by far. Second is India with 1.5 billion people. We do more testing. If we did half the testing, we'd have half the cases. If we did no testing, like many countries, we would have very few cases. Because we do so much testing, the fake news media loves to say cases are up. The fact is, we've done a very, very good job.
Cases are up?
We have done, that's right, because we're doing so much testing.
But Cases, will you at least say cases are up?
Yes, cases are up because we are doing tremendous testing, and we're finding where there's a problem. Testing is a good thing, but it's also very misleading.
When you're out there saying we've turned the corner, this thing is disappearing,
That's
and
right, we have
people can
turned the corner.
see,
We have turned the
people
corner.
can see cases going up all over in the Midwest, in the Mountain West. Record numbers of
We have
cases in
turned the
some
corner.
states.
We understand the disease. We understand the elderly, and we're taking care of them at a level like nobody's ever taken care of the elderly, especially the elderly with diabetes problems, heart problems. We are taking care of them like nobody's ever taken care of them. We also understand youth, 99.9%. As an example, Barron had it, and it was gone in no time. It was just like, he had it, it was gone, hardly knew he even had it. So we are taking care of our people, but we've done a great job with the ventilators, with the equipment, with stocking governors that were not stocked. We've made a lot of governors look very good that shouldn't look good, and that's okay with me.
Okay, let me ask you something about suburban women.
Yeah.
You said the other day to suburban women, will you please like me, please?
Oh, I didn't say that. You know, that's so misleading the way I say jokingly, suburban women, you should love me because I'm giving you security and I got rid of the worst regulation. See, the way you said that
Yeah,
is why people think of you and everyone else as fake news. I said kiddingly, suburban women, you should love me. I got rid of a regulation
you
that
said.
would bring low-income housing into suburbia that would destroy suburbia. And I said that in a joking way. The way you have it, it's like, oh, like I'm begging. I'm kidding. Play it, and I'm kidding. That is such a misleading question, listen.
But you're behind the suburban women in the polls.
I doubt it. I doubt it. I really doubt it.
One of the
I'm
things,
saving suburbia. He's gonna destroy suburbia. He's got a regulation, which I terminated, that he would put back, and even worse, that will destroy, that will bring low-income housing projects into suburbia.